There's a shift that happens in every anxious avoidant dynamic that no one prepares you for. It's not the moment you finally cry, not the moment you send the last message, not even the moment you accept it's over. It's the moment they realize you didn't fall apart. And most people get this completely wrong. They think the way to wake up an avoidant is to show them how much pain they caused, to cry louder, to reach out one more time, to make them feel guilty enough to come back. But that approach does the opposite of what you want. It actually confirms every story the avoidant has been telling themselves about why closeness is dangerous and why keeping you at a distance was the right call. Research from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology shows something that changes everything about how we understand avoidant attachment. When an anxious partner continues to chase, the avoidant's nervous system stays regulated. Calm, even. The pursuit gives them something to push against. And as long as they have something to push against, they never have to feel the weight of what they're actually losing. The chase, as painful as it is for you, is comfortable for them. It keeps the dynamic exactly where their nervous system wants it. I work with people going through this every single day. People who have sent the paragraphs, made the calls, shown up with their whole heart only to be met with distance, one-word answers, or that unbearable half-effort that keeps you just close enough to stay but never close enough to feel safe. And the one thing they all have in common is this. They believe that loving harder would eventually break through, that if they could just find the right words, the right moment, the right version of themselves, the avoidant would finally open up. By the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why that never works, what actually triggers panic in an avoidant, and why the most powerful thing you have ever done for yourself and for them is the thing you were most afraid to do. Stop. So, let's start with what actually happened the moment you went quiet. You stopped texting. You stopped checking in. You stopped being the one who always reached out first. And from the outside, it probably looked like nothing. No dramatic exit. No final confrontation. Just silence. But inside the avoidance world, that silence landed like a foreign object. Something unfamiliar. Something their system had no ready response for. Because here's the thing about avoidance that most people never understand. They do not panic when you beg. They panic when you detach. Begging is something they know how to handle. It confirms their belief that emotional closeness leads to being overwhelmed, which gives them permission to keep pulling away. But your silence? That broke the script entirely. And a person whose entire emotional survival depends on controlling the distance between themselves and others cannot function when the script breaks. They expected you to chase. That is not an assumption. It is a pattern their nervous system had learned to count on. Every time they pulled back in the past, you reached forward. Every time they went cold, you found a way to warm things back up without even realizing it. You had trained them to expect your pursuit the same way someone expects the sun to rise. It was just something that happened. So when you stopped, they waited. They figured you needed a day. Maybe two. They told themselves you were just giving them a taste of their own medicine and that you would break first, like always. But you didn't send a paragraph. You didn't break no contact. You didn't post something clearly designed to get their attention. And the longer that silence stretched, the more their quiet confidence started to crack. Your silence was not weakness. A lot of people mistake going quiet for giving up, for having nothing left to say, for losing. But psychologically, what you did was remove the one thing that was keeping the avoidance emotional system stable. Your emotional supply. Avoidants regulate themselves through control. They manage intimacy by controlling how much of it they allow in at any given time. And the way they maintain that control is by keeping you in a predictable position, reaching, waiting, hoping. The moment you stepped out of that position, their control disappeared. There was nothing left to manage, nothing to push against, nothing to reassure them that they were still the one holding the power. And when a person who survives through emotional distance suddenly loses the ability to control that distance, anxiety fills the space where certainty used to be. At first, they told themselves they were fine. That is always how it starts. They went back to their routines. They slept. They worked. They probably even felt a short burst of relief, the way anyone feels when a pressure they have been resisting finally lifts. But then something small happened. They picked up their phone out of habit and noticed there was nothing from you. Not a message. Not a reaction to their story. Not even a view. And the absence of something they had grown used to is a very different feeling from simply not having it in the first place. They started noticing the void in small, specific ways. The quiet on a Sunday morning that used to belong to your conversations. The lack of someone to share a random thought with. The strange, hollow feeling of a week passing without your name appearing anywhere. They were not missing you the way they expected to miss someone. They were missing the version of reality where you were still orbiting them, because that orbit had become part of how they understood themselves. And that is where the ego shock comes in. When you were begging, when you were sending long messages and asking for explanations and trying to understand why they kept pulling away, the avoidant felt powerful, not in a cruel way, necessarily, but in the way that someone feels powerful when they know they are wanted. Your desperation, as painful as it was for you, was actually feeding something in them. It was proof that they mattered, that they were chosen, that even while keeping you at arm's length, they still had you. But the moment you walked away calmly, without an explosion, without a final plea, without giving the dramatic ending that would have at least made them feel significant enough to fight over, they felt something they were not prepared for. They felt replaceable. And for someone who has spent their entire life building emotional walls to protect a very fragile sense of self, feeling replaceable is not just uncomfortable, it is destabilizing. Weeks passed, maybe more, and here is what most people do not realize about avoidant attachment. The loss does not hit them when you leave. It hits them when they try to come back and realize the door is no longer wide open. You had already started rebuilding. You were sleeping better, thinking about them less, laughing more easily. Your nervous system, which had been stuck in fight or flight for months, was finally beginning to settle. And it was exactly at that moment, when you had stabilized, when you had quietly moved forward, that the message appeared. Not a grand confession, nothing dramatic, just something low stakes enough to give him an exit, if needed. Hey, I've been thinking about you. Or this reminded me of you, a breadcrumb, a toe in the water. Because avoidants do not come back with their whole chest. They come back with a test. They need to know if the door is still open before they will risk walking through it. But what they were really testing was not whether you still cared. What they were testing was whether they could return to the old dynamic, the one where they got to have access to your warmth, your consistency, your emotional presence, without ever having to be fully vulnerable in return. And that is the real fear underneath all of it. It was never about losing you, not at first. It was about losing access to emotional security on their own terms, the ability to come close when it felt safe and disappear when it felt like too much. That is what your detachment took away, not the relationship, the convenience of it. And so here is where everything lands. You did not beg. You did not threaten. You did not engineer some plan to make them jealous or manufacture distance to seem more valuable. You simply reached a point where you chose your own peace over the exhausting work of maintaining a connection that was only being held up by you. That choice, quiet, undramatic, and completely yours, was the one move they never had a strategy for. Every other thing you had ever done, they had a response to. Your tears, your anger, your love, your patience. They had learned how to navigate all of it while keeping themselves protected. But your peace? They had no answer for that. Because you cannot chase someone who has stopped running. You cannot pull someone back who has already decided they are exactly where they need to be. Your detachment was not a tactic. It was not a game. It was a moment you finally stopped outsourcing your sense of worth to someone who was not ready to hold it. And that is not the end of a love story. That is the beginning of knowing what real love is actually supposed to feel like